I had stirks with her sister, but I still love my wife. Please read my narrative through to the end before judging. For 10 years, Lena and I were wed, and if you had told me all those years ago that I would eventually sleep with her elder sister Riley, 40, and eventually get married to Riley, I wouldn't have believed you. We will discuss that. Lena, who I shall always consider my real wife, passed away from pancreatic cancer, which marked the start of the nightmare. When I questioned, was she telling the truth? One evening, 2 weekends ago, the second chapter of my grieving started. "How about?" Riley answered. I watched the snowstorm outside the window from Macy Manor's front room, seeing white berry black. Riley, meanwhile, was nursing a tumbler of brandy in her loose fingers while seated in her father's old armchair by the roaring fireplace, evidently thinking about everything, just like me. Riley became Lena's guardian after inheriting the opulent Edwardian home from Mr. and Mrs. Macy after their deaths in 2005. Shortly after this, my childhood buddy Lena came clean about the facts. I finally said, "Lena told me that the two of you could see the spirits of your parents." I followed Riley's eyes as she gazed blankly at the other side of the room. A vacant recliner with a motionless shadow on it caught my attention. Oddly, the room's other surfaces were all covered with dancing patches of darkness from the fireplace's flaming fire. Finally, my late wife's sister murmured, "This house was built by Ernest Macy on a dark hole in the ground a century ago. Because it had a horrible effect on him, he wrote in his diary that descendants should never go into the hole." Despite this, the Macy family was given the power to view the ghosts of their departed loved ones. Let's face it, that gift will undoubtedly perish with me. As the final member of the Macy family, I will not be having any children. I tried to contain my laughter as I remarked, "Lena never mentioned a magical hole in the dirt." Riley smirked and tapped the heel of her foot against a dusty, leather-bound book on the coffee table. "Because you always wear that shit-eating grin on your face, Artie," she said. "This diary belongs to Ernest." I remarked, "I believe that book has been there ever since I first came to your house." "In any case, Riley, I've always respected your family's beliefs, but I've never seen any signs of ghosts." She answered, "Well, you're not a Macy." I nodded as I pressed my hand over Lena's engagement band outline in my pocket. Not quite. Riley kept staring at the eerie recliner, which was deserted but for the thick shade covering it, before stating icily, "Lena wants to show you, the best way she can show a non-Macy, that she's here." I answered instantly, without even thinking, "I want to believe. If you hear..." "Lena..." The vacant armchair cut me off. It was thrown upward and inverted, smashed into the white ceiling that its base clung to. Naturally, as any sane person would, I yelled. I tensed every muscle in my body, and veins poked out from under my skin. A second later, the paranormal chair toppled over and collapsed on the floor, piling up a pile of dust. I croaked, "I felt her in this house," after an indeterminate period of silence ever since she died. According to Riley, the dead never really leave this place, so grief is different for a Macy. Artie, even for you, you are just as good as your family. What if I had been a Macy after all? With tears in my eyes, I asked, what if I had adopted Lena's name after we were married? She gave a nod. My mother saw the faces of the deceased after marrying into the family. I then asked a horrifying question without pausing appropriately. "We ought to get married, me and you. In this manner, I will also be able to see her." When Riley realized I was telling the truth, I anticipated a cry of protest or mockery. However, she appeared to pick up on my honesty right away. Maybe the idea had already occurred to her. She said, "Artie, let's not go there." I faced my wife's shadow, which I knew was cast by the toppled armchair. On paper, it would only be a marriage, Lena. Riley said, "I'm not refusing on her behalf. Additionally, you would have to do more than simply officially alter your last name. Artie, we would have to complete the marriage." My stoic voice said, "Oh," and then there was the disapproving creak of the flipped recliner. "Oh, ho, ho, ho," Riley said again, giggling, "in the sense that you wish you could see the face your wife is pulling." After that, I grew silent, and a short while later, my sister-in-law went to bed. In contrast, I read Ernest's diary in brief. Throughout the remainder of the evening, Lena and I were reading together, and as we read Ernest's portion, The Plea of Two, I could feel her excitement, which was equal to mine. A section of the ancient brown page was ripped off by a gust of wind, revealing the following passage. "Two surviving Macy family members must carry out the rite in order to restore a loved one's corporeal form." But I sensed it in the atmosphere. I had the impression that my wife desired a second chance at life, and I wouldn't have pressed it if she hadn't. I wouldn't have woken Riley up at 4 a.m. to explain the situation. She argued with Lena over the morality of it all, focusing more on reviving the dead than marrying and having sex with her late sister's husband. I should have listened, and so should Lena. However, we didn't, and Riley was tainted by that wish to put an end to our shared sorrow after just 10 minutes of argument. I would always regret it if we didn't try. I held my jaw. Is that indicative of... Then my sister-in-law interrupted, saying, "Vegas is the quick option, and we'll quickly consummate our marriage." Not a light. "Don't talk." I nodded and eyeballed the dark part of the bedroom where I knew Lena was hiding while crying happily. Riley and I took a plane to Vegas a few days after we were able to secure Estes, signed the document, carried out the action. For a little less than 10 seconds, the biggest embarrassment of our lives took place in a darkened hotel room. It was followed by a lengthy, silent trip back to England. We went back to Macy Manor a week after coming up with our idea, drove down the driveway on a snowier and darker night than the one when we had made this strange choice. But as soon as she crossed the threshold, all of that uneasiness and remorse vanished because she was there, blonde in her distinctive blue dungaree. She was a ghostly glow that watched me from the main staircase, burning glaringly into my retinas. As we sprinted toward each other, we sobbed and declared our love for one another. As our arms passed through each other, the tears just got heavier since we knew we couldn't touch. Naturally, I reminded myself of Riley's and my sole motivation for our actions. We intended to retrieve Lena. As Riley and I, holding hands, followed the directions in Ernest's diary, the ghost of my wife stood in the doorway of the front room, reciting the plea of two. Two Macy members begged for a sinister force that we couldn't comprehend to bring Lena back to us in tangible form. We were not allowed to even peek into that dark hole in the basement, so we begged. I questioned whether Ernest's stringent rule had actually been followed by every member of the Macy family. In 100 years, someone else must have been down there. With a force that shook the house itself, the heavy diary slammed shut, yanking me out of my reverie. Riley and I responded by gasping, turning to face the doorway, and then gasping once again. There was no phantom form of Lena. Then there was a squeak from the entrance. Having no sense of self-defense, I crept over to the lobby, looked around the doorframe, and let out a heartfelt whimper as I noticed the basement door open. In my 20 years of visiting Macy Manor, I had never seen a door open, and a fairly shy pair of blue eyes that I might have recognized anywhere gleamed through the tiny opening in the basement staircase's darkness. This time, they weren't translucent. "Lena," I sobbed, feeling twice as happy as when we first met again. "Artie," as I hurried forward, Riley started, her hoarse voice containing overtones of fear and doubt. I hardly paid attention to anything but the woman I loved's eyes. With eager blindness, I grabbed for the door handle. I didn't even think it strange that Lena's blue eyes vanished into the shadows as I flung the door open. I did the same. In that shadowy, forbidden area of the mansion, they bounced down wooden steps. Riley was correct. Morning is different for a Macy. Willfully ignored the stench of a smell that did not belong in the physical planet. An empty window frame slit welcomed moonlight inside, revealing a dark hole in the basement floor itself. Ernest may have kept the eerie entrance under lock and key since an old wooden door was open, but none of that mattered to me. Most importantly, the moonlight showed Lena. From my naive mind to my light toes, everything there was a dream, as I was maybe physically floating in the direction of my wife's corporeal form. Only when our lips touched did the vision turn nasty, a sensation that had been attempting to surface since Riley and I finished the plea of two finally materialized. My lips was flooded with warmth, a black warmth that had gotten past my defenses and violated my senses. I shouted as I opened my eyes, but her mouth smothered my scream. I gazed into black eyes instead of brown ones, a hungry black that ate the irises and eventually the eyes in their totality. She stepped backwards and started to reverse into the hole, taking me with her as her powerful fingers dug deeply into my upper arms, stopping me from escaping. Everything had been false. No one would ever be saved by the plea of two. Something else emerged from the hole. I began to worry about what other falsehoods the blackness could have told Ernest Macy and what horrifying rites he might have carried out. I caught a glimpse of Riley in the glossy mirror of the demon's dark eyes as footsteps walked down the stairs. I saw her almost reach me before being flung against the basement's far wall like a rag doll. My trainer's toes began to slink into the awful blackness, and I experienced an unfathomably chilly feeling that no human can comprehend. I closed my eyes and wished for my death because I thought that living in that dark place would be the worst nightmare someone could have. But even though I was blind, I was shocked when I felt the creature's lips and nails let go of my weak body and I fell back onto the cellar floor. And I saw something dreadfully beautiful as I opened my eyes. The false Lena's hair was knotted with white hands that came from a form that shone brightly in the dark cellar. The hands then started to push the dishonest creature's head lower, sending it back to the dark realm. I cried when the ghost of the real Lena, with her neck and wrists bound to the black world below by steel chains, appeared behind the creature she was immersing in the shadows, into the terrifying realm that was also claiming Lena's shackled spectral body. "I love you," she said with a tearful mouth. As Lena's sad gaze slipped into the opening and followed the thing she had defeated, I stretched out helplessly. Subsequently, the wooden trapdoor closed. I've been grieving more deeply than ever for days. Riley had been correct all along, and my incapacity to move on only made the grief worse. I abstain from eating. I'm not a sleeper. I observe the several lifeless faces of the Macy family as I sit in her living room. But even if that hope kills me, there is only one person I want to see. I'll find a way to get her back if she doesn't enter that door soon.